Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. We'll guide you through the ups and downs of note investing and teach you all about the nitty-gritty details of the business that other people won't talk about. Your host, Dan Deppen, is a former aerospace engineer and product manager who transitioned away from cubicle life to full-time note investing in 2018. Our website is www.fusionnotes.com, where you can subscribe to this podcast, comment, and find links to other information on note investing.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. Your host, Dan Deppen. And this week, I'm going to be giving a recap of my recent trip to the IMN Conference and my top 5 takeaways from that conference. IMN is technically a notes and default servicing conference that happens. They do it once a year in February in Fort Lauderdale, and then there's actually another one on the West Coast, I think in June, in San Diego. This was my first time attending this conference, so I kind of want to share some of the things that I learned from it. For me, this was really a unique and a really cool event. I've done a lot of conferences over the years, not just in notes, but in my corporate career, and there were a lot of elements of this one that I really, really liked and got a lot out of. So this conference had about 500 attendees altogether. It was, unlike the difference between this and some other note conferences I've gone to, like Note Expo is kind of the notable one, is this was really kind of a higher level conference. So we had a lot of hedge funds and some larger hedge funds, a bunch of individual note buyers and note sellers, and then a whole boatload of vendors. Foreclosure attorneys, some different servicers, and then a lot of various REO vendors or vendors that can help you deal with REOs, which I've talked about before. It's always a big pain point for me. And then a lot of other vendors as well. So this is a conference I had thought about going to before. What kind of held me back in the past was pretty expensive. I think it's like a $1,200 or $1,600 ticket. Normally, I had the good fortune of getting invited to take part in a panel discussion on due diligence, which I'll talk about here a little bit coming up, which actually got me a free ticket, which was kind of nice. I enjoyed that. But yeah, very good conference overall. Like I said, kind of higher level than some of the others. If you look at other note conferences like Note Expo, which is one of my favorites and one I'll be attending later this year, and I highly recommend you go. Ones like that tend to have more new note investors, whereas IMN is really kind of a level up where you're dealing more with hedge funds, and pretty much everybody there is really neck deep in the business, and they're either doing a lot of stuff or been at it for quite a long time. So a lot of really interesting conversations that you don't normally get to have. That I really enjoyed. So getting into my top 5 takeaways. So takeaway number 1 was that IMN had the most pre-networking than I think any other conference I've ever attended. So if you're if you go to conferences for your job, you probably know that really the key to having a successful conference and getting a lot out of it is to do a lot of pre-planning and set up meetings ahead of time with people that you want to meet with or potentially work with. And with this IMN conference, they actually had a website where they listed all the attendees, and they kind of had like this mini social network where you could connect with them ahead of time and set up meetings. And so I had set up a bunch of 15-minute meetings with various folks. Then I had a lot of other folks reach out to me as well. And I actually got concerned that there were too many. At one point, I kind of stopped scheduling them because if I wanted to, I think I could have just scheduled myself wall to wall throughout the entire event. And I should say too, this event only runs a day and a half. Starts on a Monday morning and then goes till Tuesday at lunch. So you can fill up that time pretty quickly. So at some point I stopped scheduling meetings because I wanted to make sure there was time to schedule time with people I might bump into while I'm there, and also wanted to attend some of the sessions. The other thing I'll point out too is that a lot of people come into town the Sunday prior. So I actually set up some meetings that Sunday afternoon. So if you're thinking about going to this next time, I definitely recommend getting in by Sunday morning so that you can have some opportunity to schedule things Sunday afternoon and then, go to dinners and things like that. There was a dinner meetup beforehand at Rocco's Tacos that was really good. I think originally they planned it for like 20 or so people, and there were probably like 50 there all together. So Kish North was there and bought some appetizers, which is really nice. And then Aaron Quinn, who I've had a podcast on before, bought dinner for lots of folks, which was really amazing. I didn't expect her to do that. And for me, my original plan was actually my original flight. I was getting in Sunday night late at like 11 p.m. or something like that. But then when I kind of realized there were all these things going on before, I changed my flight to get myself in Saturday night. Now that didn't quite work out the way I planned because I flew Spirit Airlines, which it's like Spirit and Frontier. I hate them both, but a lot of times they're cheap, and if it works out, I just go into it knowing it's probably going to be a mess. But on Spirit, I was able to fly in directly from Denver to Fort Lauderdale, which was kind of nice. But of course, then they called me on Saturday and said they had some problem with my ticket and I no longer had a seat to get in there Saturday night, but they said, no problem, we can put you on a red eye. So I actually ended up getting in Sunday morning, I think at 5:30 a.m. And I rode in the back of the middle seat all night with two people next to me flopping around and hitting me. But I don't know. I've done a lot of traveling in previous jobs. I can kind of deal with whatever. But if you do fly in, or when you do fly in, I recommend definitely getting in, by the morning on Sunday so you can meet with some folks and set up as many meetings as you can ahead of time while still leaving room to actually participate in the conference. Takeaway number 2 is that the sessions that I did attend, and I didn't attend a ton because what always happens is, you end up networking with a lot of people and talking to a lot of people. In fact, I think the last time I went to Node Expo, I maybe took in like less than an hour of the conference content. But this one I wanted to do a little more. And takeaway number 2 is that the session content that I was able to listen to was extremely meaty and really dense and a lot of good things to learn about. There was advice on sourcing. There was my due diligence panel, but then there were some other panels that talked about due diligence as well and got into kind of specifically dealing with title flaws. And there was another session, and if you're watching the video of this, I'm showing a picture of this panel, which was on buying tail loans. And going into this, I actually wasn't familiar with the term tail loans, although I bought some myself. And with tail loans, what they're talking about is loans that are maybe the leftovers when a fund is shutting down or the leftovers from a mortgage-backed security. Buying loans from a fund when they're shutting down is a really great time because you can often get good deals because oftentimes the way that funds are set up, they'll have some time horizon that says, okay, we're going to run this for 5 years or whatever it is, and then sell everything out, often cash out our investors. So that's often where we can get good deals. But as I talked about on the panel too, you want to be very careful with that because sometimes the loans that are left at the end are ones that may have problems, right? Whether they be title defects or properties that are in rough shape or other things. So, buying tail loans is a pretty good opportunity. It's something that I'm a fan of doing. You just have to tread even maybe a little bit more lightly than you would when you're buying other loans. So there were a lot of great takeaways from that. Like I said, sometimes, at other various, node events, there's sometimes session content that's kind of, I've heard several times before, or sometimes stays very high level and a little more aimed at, the very beginning note investor who's trying to wrap their head around it. What I really loved about these sessions at IMN was they really went into depth, and you're able to leverage the experience of folks who have been at this a hell of a lot longer than what I have. So I really appreciated that. It's really, really worthwhile. Takeaway number three is that, if you can get on a panel, it's a really great way to meet more people and also wrangle yourself a free ticket. So as I mentioned, I participated on a panel that was on due diligence, and so it was moderated by Alice Godofsky, who owns Pro Title USA, who's actually one of the vendors that I use a lot. As far as doing the panel itself, we had some talks beforehand. In some ways, you know, I'll reveal that these are a little bit scripted, so we kind of talked ahead of time about what topics we were going to cover and sort of who was going to talk about what. So I was kind of prepared for that, and that makes it a little bit easier. So I talked about some things like talking to code enforcement beforehand, and ways to deal with them and how to get information out of them on your assets. But then there were some other questions that came in as well. There's a question I answered about wasn't really involving due diligence, but when it's okay to cancel an indicative bid. And basically what I explained to them was, yes, you can absolutely cancel bids if you need to, but you just want to be very good about how you communicate with the seller. I mean, hopefully you kind of stated your assumptions up front when you put in the bid, and then if you do need to cancel it, follow through with the reason why and the supporting information. So like as an example, if you find a title defect, a fatal title defect, then I give them a copy of the O&E report. Or if the value was low and the property was trashed, I would give them a copy of the BPO that I pulled. Things like that. But that was really great. And also, they caught my ticket to the conference, which I didn't even realize they were going to do. When I accepted, I was interested in going anyways and interested in being on the panel. So, that was a really great experience. And it is kind of fun, honestly, to, sit on the stage and answer some questions. And then you also get to meet some of the other people on the panel, which is really great. So really, really cool experience. I mean, probably one of the highlights of my note investing career was being able to do this. So hopefully I'll be able to do this again at a future one. Takeaway number 4 was that was on sourcing. And, sometimes finding the right sources can take a little bit of luck. And so when I went down to Florida for this conference, my main priority, right? So I talked a little bit about how you want to kind of pre-plan meetings and networking. You also want to go in there with a mission, right? There's usually something. If you're going to go to a conference, you don't want to go to a conference just for the sake of doing it or for traveling and running around, even though that's kind of fun. For me, my big mission going to this conference was to find new sources. That was really what I was focused on. And it was interesting because the first half of the conference, like Sunday and seemed like Monday morning, everybody I talked to, no one really seemed to have loans for sale. And a lot of the note investors I was talking to were kind of complaining that things had kind of dried up for them and they weren't finding a whole lot. But then about halfway through, it was interesting. Things just seemed to flip. And all of a sudden, I started finding folks who had non-performing and performing loans for sale. Either I bumped into them directly. In some cases, I was getting referrals from other folks, as I continued to network throughout the conference. And I would tell people what I was looking for. I would start to get leads and say, oh, well, I talked to this person. They had some things like you're looking for. You should go talk to them. And then I would track them down. And then at one point, at the very end, I was having a conversation with someone who was going to send me a tape of assets. And someone was sitting there who I didn't even really notice. When we got done talking, said, oh, hey, that's what you're looking for. I have some of that too. So there's a little bit of serendipity involved. With 500 people at the conference, I kind of sat down beforehand and I tried to kind of figure out everybody who was there, but there's really just too many people to do that. It would take hours and hours to get through everything. So you kind of want to, what I did was I found some people ahead of time to make meetings with. And then, as I was at the conference, continue to talk to different folks and see what was out there. And eventually you can kind of find your way. I'll point out too that it's very important to kind of get out of your normal group. Like, I spent a decent amount of time, hanging out with folks that I'm good friends with, and talking to them, because one of the things I really like about these events, it's a really good opportunity to catch up with folks face to face, some of whom I talk to on the phone all the time. But you also kind of want to spend some time out of that network so you can meet new people and find new sources as well. But again, it sometimes feels like a little bit of a crapshoot. And I just thought it was interesting how, this first half of it, I was kind of coming away going, wow, things seems like sourcing is kind of dry out there. And then by the time the conference was over, I had the opposite perception. There's actually quite a bit of product out there that you can buy. So that was takeaway number 4. And then takeaway number 5, the last one, is that more people listen to this podcast than I had realized. I talked to a number of folks, some of whom operate at a fairly high level, and have some decent sized funds, that knew who I was and said, "Oh, I listened to your podcast," and I was kind of humbled by that and blown away. So the reach is actually a little bigger than I had realized. So that was kind of cool, and that made me feel good. So I'll keep, obviously trying to put out good content here. But it's funny, a lot of times, I record these in my house, or I'm, having a conversation with somebody, and I guess I don't quite realize how many people end up listening to it. So that was kind of cool, and provides additional motivation to continue to put these things out. And then the last thing I'll mention, this wasn't really a key takeaway, but it was something that I already knew, but I think it's very important, and it's something that I want to emphasize when you attend conferences, is that following up with folks is really a big key. A lot of times people go to these events, talk to a lot of people, collect a lot of business cards, but then they don't follow up after the fact, right? Like, having a conversation with somebody is great, but if you don't do anything afterwards, then you're really not going to build the relationships that you need and make the solid contacts that you need. They're going to benefit both of you going forward in the future. So, one of the things I do too during the conference, because the other thing that always happens to me is I have conversations with various people, and in the moment I think, oh, okay, I need to follow up with them. I need to do this, I need to do that. They told me this great information. I always carry around a notebook, and then as I can, take little notes on things, because otherwise, you get back from a conference a couple days later, and for me anyways, it becomes hard to remember specific conversations. So when I came back, I had my list of notes and my business cards, and I made sure that I followed up with all of those people afterwards, because that's really where you get a lot of the value out of the conference. And then people I need to follow up with in the future, I'll also make some notes in my CRM of what we talked about, because the other thing I've been guilty of is, I have a conversation with somebody and then they get in touch with me 6 months later, and I have a hard time remembering what we discussed because so much has transpired by then. So if you do end up going to this next year, or as you go to like Node Expo and some of the other events that are coming up, definitely follow up is a huge key. Don't ever forget to do that. It's very easy to forget to do. So that's what I've got for you in this episode. Again, leave comments and reach out if you have any questions about this or any other suggestions for future episodes or other things you'd like to hear. Please do keep in touch. So that's a wrap for today, and I will see you next time. Thanks.